Hashtag the unnamed warrior. Part 1. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Lieutenant Sarah Chun adjusted her scope for the 100th time that week. The shooting range stretched out before her like a concrete ribbon, dotted with targets that seemed impossibly small from her position. She had been here for 6 months now, longer than any woman before her, and still the whispers followed her wherever she went. "Think she'll make it through another week?" she heard one of the instructors mutter to another as they passed behind her position. Sarah didn't turn around. She had learned early in her military career that showing emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she focused on her breathing, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. The wind was calm today, barely registering on the flags downrange. Perfect conditions for what she had planned. The Navy SEAL training facility in Coronado had seen thousands of hopefuls come and go over the decades. Most were men who had dreamed since childhood of earning the coveted trident pin. They came with muscles built from years of preparation, minds steeled for the legendary Hell Week, and hearts full of determination. But Sarah Chin was different. She carried no childhood dreams of becoming a SEAL because, until recently, it hadn't been possible. Born in a small town in Oregon, Sarah had grown up on her grandfather's ranch, learning to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. Her grandfather, a Korean War veteran, had taught her that precision wasn't just about steady hands or sharp eyes. It was about understanding wind patterns, calculating distances in your head faster than any computer, and, most importantly, controlling the chaos in your mind when everything around you was falling apart. A good shot, he used to tell her while they hunted deer in the mountains, isn't someone who never misses. It's someone who makes the shot that matters most when everything is on the line. Sarah's journey to this moment had been anything but straightforward. After college, she had joined the Army, excelling in marksmanship programs that eventually caught the attention of special operations recruiters. Her scores were consistently in the top percentile, but more than that, she had something that couldn't be taught, an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. During her deployment in Afghanistan, she had served as a designated marksman with an infantry unit. It was there, in the harsh mountains and dusty valleys, that she had earned a reputation that would follow her for the rest of her career. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in April during what was supposed to be a routine patrol. Her unit had been moving through a valley when insurgents opened fire from elevated positions on 3 sides. The crossfire was devastating, pinning down her squad behind inadequate cover, while enemies poured automatic weapons fire from distances that made return fire nearly impossible with standard rifles. Sarah had been carrying her M24 sniper rifle that day, a weapon she had personalized and fine-tuned over months of deployment. While her squad mates fought desperately to return fire with their assault rifles, she methodically began identifying and eliminating the enemy positions one by one. The shots came from over 800 meters away in windy conditions while under fire herself. In less than 10 minutes, she had neutralized 7 enemy combatants, effectively ending the ambush and saving the lives of her entire squad. But what made the incident legendary wasn't just the technical skill involved. It was the fact that she had done it while simultaneously coordinating medical aid for 2 wounded soldiers, using her radio to call in helicopter support, and never once losing her composure. The after-action reports describe her actions in dry military language, but the soldiers who were there told a different story. They talked about the eerie calm in her voice as she called out range, and wind corrections to herself, the mechanical precision of her movements as she cycled through targets, and the way she seemed to exist in a completely different time frame from the chaos around her. Word of the incident traveled quickly through military channels, eventually reaching the special operations community. It was there that someone first suggested she might be a candidate for SEAL training, once the barriers preventing women from serving in combat roles were officially lifted. The idea seemed impossible at first. The Navy SEALs were the most elite fighting force in the world, with a failure rate that exceeded 90% even among the most prepared candidates. The physical demands alone had broken countless strong men, and The mental pressure was designed to push candidates beyond their perceived limits. But Sarah's commanding officers saw something in her that went beyond physical capability. They saw the kind of mental toughness that couldn't be manufactured, the ability to think clearly when others were paralyzed by fear, and, most importantly, the humility to constantly improve rather than rest on her accomplishments. When she finally received the invitation to attend SEAL training, Sarah knew she was stepping into uncharted territory. She would be among the first women to attempt the course, which meant every success and failure would be scrutinized, analyzed, and debated by people who had strong opinions about women in combat roles. The months leading up to her arrival at Coronado had been filled with additional physical training, mental preparation, and countless conversations with military psychologists who wanted to understand her motivations. Why was she willing to attempt something that might end her career if she failed? What drove her to pursue a path that would inevitably make her a lightning rod for controversy? Sarah's answers were always simple and direct. She wanted to serve at the highest level possible, to use her skills where they could make the most difference, and to prove that capability mattered more than gender when lives were on the line. Now, 6 months into the training, she had survived the initial screening, the physical fitness tests, and the beginning phases of what would become the most challenging experience of her life. But she had also learned that technical skill was only part of what made a successful SEAL. The real test was earning the respect of her peers and instructors, people who had dedicated their lives to maintaining the standards that made the SEALs legendary. As she prepared for her next shot, Sarah thought about the conversation she had overheard the night before in the mess hall. 2 senior instructors were discussing whether the standards should be modified for female candidates, a debate that made her stomach tighten with frustration. She didn't want accommodation or special consideration. She wanted to succeed or fail on exactly the same terms as every man who had attempted the course before her. The target downrange was a standard silhouette at 600 meters, a distance that most infantry soldiers would consider challenging with a sniper rifle. But Sarah had been practicing at this range every day for weeks, studying wind patterns, memorizing the subtle variations in her equipment, and pushing herself to achieve the kind of consistency that would be expected in combat situations. She settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar ritual that had become as natural as breathing. First, she checked her scope settings and confirmed her range estimation. Then, she observed the wind flags and grass movement, calculating the drift that would affect her bullet's path. Finally, she controlled her breathing, finding that perfect moment between heartbeats when her body was completely still. The shot broke clean, and she watched through her scope as the bullet found its mark exactly where she had intended. It was a good shot, but not exceptional by her standards. She had been making shots like this consistently for months. What she needed now was to demonstrate that she could perform under conditions that more closely resembled actual combat. That opportunity would come sooner than she expected. Unknown to Sarah, her instructors had been planning a special exercise designed to test not just her marksmanship, but her ability to function as part of a team under extreme pressure. It would be the kind of test that could either establish her place in the program or end her dreams of becoming a SEAL. The exercise was scheduled for the following week, and it would involve live ammunition, moving targets, and time pressure that would simulate the chaos of actual combat operations. More importantly, it would be conducted in front of a group of senior SEALs who had volunteered to observe and evaluate her performance. Sarah knew that this would be her moment to prove herself, not just as a marksman, but as someone worthy of wearing the trident. She had trained for this opportunity her entire adult life, even before she knew it was possible. Everything she had learned on her grandfather's ranch, in army training, and during her deployment in Afghanistan had led to this moment. As she packed up her equipment that day, Sarah felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just trying to complete a training program. She was carrying the hopes and doubts of everyone who believed that women belonged in special operations, as well as the skepticism of those who thought she was attempting something beyond her capabilities. But as she walked back toward the barracks, Sarah's mind was already focused on the week ahead. She would spend the next few days preparing mentally and physically for what might be the most important test of her military career. She would review everything she knew about ballistics, practice her equipment handling until it was automatic, and, most importantly, prepare herself to remain calm and focused regardless of what challenges her instructors threw at her. The sun was setting over Coronado as Sarah reached her quarters, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of hunting trips with her grandfather. She thought about his words, about making the shot that mattered most when everything was on the line. Soon, she would find out if she had truly absorbed that lesson. Hashtag the test of fire. Part 2. The alarm shattered the pre-dawn silence at 0400 hours, pulling Sarah from a dreamless sleep. She had been expecting this moment for weeks, but the sudden jolt still sent adrenaline coursing through her system. Around her, other candidates scrambled to get dressed and gather their gear, but Sarah moved with deliberate calm, methodically checking each piece of equipment as she had done hundreds of times before. "Chun, briefing room in 10 minutes, barked Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, the lead instructor whose weathered face had seen more combat than most soldiers could imagine. "Full kit, weapon ready." Sarah nodded and continued her preparations. She had learned early in the program that rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes in SEAL training could be catastrophic. Her rifle case was already packed with her customized M24 extra ammunition and the specialized equipment she had requested for long-range shooting. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. The briefing room was stark and functional, with maps covering the walls and a large projection screen at the front. As Sarah entered, she noticed immediately that the usual group of instructor staff had been joined by several men she didn't recognize. These newcomers wore the casual clothing that often identified active duty SEALs between missions, and their presence sent a clear message. This was not a routine training exercise. Chief Rodriguez waited until all 12 remaining candidates were seated before beginning his briefing. The group had started with over 60 hopefuls 6 months earlier, but the relentless pace of SEAL training had whittled them down to this core group of survivors. Sarah was not only the lone woman remaining, but she had consistently ranked in the top 3 performers throughout the program. "Gentlemen," Rodriguez began, his eyes briefly meeting Sarah's before continuing, "and, lady, today you will participate in Exercise Crosswind. This is a live-fire exercise designed to simulate close air support for a special operations team under contact with enemy forces." The projection screen came alive with satellite imagery of a training area that Sarah recognized as being about 20 miles inland from Coronado. The terrain was rugged, with steep hills, dense vegetation, and a series of structures that had been built specifically for urban warfare training. At 0600 hours, a team of instructors will establish defensive positions in the urban training facility, Rodriguez continued. They will be playing the role of a SEAL team that has been pinned down by superior enemy forces. Your mission is to provide precision fire support from long range, neutralizing specific threats while avoiding any shots that might endanger the friendly forces. Sarah felt her pulse quicken slightly. This was exactly the kind of scenario that played to her strengths, but it was also the type of high-stakes situation where a single mistake could have serious consequences. Live-fire exercises always carried inherent risks, but when friendlies and enemies were operating in close proximity, the margin for error became almost non-existent. "The catch," Rodriguez said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, "is that you'll be engaging targets at distances ranging from 800 to 1200 meters, in wind conditions that our meteorology team describes as challenging, and you'll have a maximum of 90 seconds from the time you identify each target to when you must engage." One of the other candidates, a former Marine named Stevens, raised his hand. "Chief, what's the consequence for missing the time limit?" "Same as missing the target," Rodriguez replied. "Immediate failure and removal from the program." The scenario assumes that delays in providing fire support result in friendly casualties. Sarah absorbed this information while studying the satellite imagery more carefully. The shooting positions were clearly marked on elevated terrain overlooking the urban facility, and she could see that the angles would be challenging. Some shots would require engaging targets, while friendly forces were positioned dangerously close to the line of fire. Each candidate will rotate through the exercise individually, Rodriguez explained. You'll be accompanied by a spotter team and communication specialist, but all shooting decisions and target identification will be yours alone. Questions? The room remained silent. Sarah's mind was already working through the ballistics calculations she would need to make, considering factors like elevation changes, wind drift at extended ranges, and the precise timing required to coordinate with the scenario playing out below. Chun, you're first up, Rodriguez announced. Transport leaves in 30 minutes. As the other candidates filed out of the briefing room, Sarah approached one of the maps for a closer look at the terrain features. She was studying the contour lines when she became aware of someone standing beside her. She turned to find one of the unknown observers, a man in his 40s with the kind of quiet intensity that marked veteran special operations personnel. You know, he said quietly, a lot of people are watching this exercise today. Some of them are hoping you succeed. Others are convinced you'll fail. What matters is what you think. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I think I've been training my whole life for this moment, whether I knew it or not. The outcome will depend on how well I execute what I already know how to do. The man nodded approvingly. Good answer. I'm Commander Harrison, by the way. I run the sniper program for DevGru. He was referring to the Navy's elite Tier 1 unit, officially known as Naval Special Warfare Development Group, but more commonly called SEAL Team 6. Sarah felt a flutter of nerves at the realization that her performance was being evaluated by someone from the most elite levels of special operations. DevGru snipers were legendary within the military community, operators who had proven themselves in the most dangerous missions around the world. Don't overthink it, Harrison continued. The fundamentals don't change just because the stakes are higher. Breathe, aim, squeeze, follow through. Everything else is just noise. 30 minutes later, Sarah found herself in the back of a military truck bouncing along a dirt road toward the training area. Her spotter for the exercise was Petty Officer First Class Williams, a SEAL sniper instructor whose reputation for precision was well known among the candidates. The communication specialist was a young sailor named Rodriguez who seemed nervous about participating in such a high-profile exercise. As they approached the shooting position, Sarah began her mental preparation routine. She visualized the shots she would need to make, considering the various angles and distances involved. More importantly, she focused on maintaining the calm mindset that had served her well throughout her military career. The shooting position was exactly as challenging as she had expected from the satellite imagery. It was located on a ridgeline approximately 1,000 meters from the urban training facility, with a commanding view of the entire area. However, the position itself was exposed to crosswinds that would significantly affect bullet trajectory at long range. Williams helped her set up the shooting platform, a specialized rest that would provide stability for extended precision shooting. While he worked with the spotting scope and range-finding equipment, Sarah began the methodical process of preparing her rifle. Every adjustment was deliberate and precise, from scope settings to stock positioning. Wind is variable, coming from the west at 12 to 15 miles per hour, with gusts up to 20, Williams reported. Temperature is 68 degrees, humidity at 40%. Barometric pressure is stable. Sarah absorbed this information while making final adjustments to her scope. The wind conditions were indeed challenging, requiring constant compensation for bullet drift at the distances she would be shooting. Any changes in wind speed or direction between the time she aimed and the time her bullet reached the target could result in a complete miss. Crosswind control, this is Overwatch, came the voice of the communications specialist. Sniper team is in position and ready to commence exercise. The radio crackled with the response. Overwatch, crosswind control. Exercise commences in 60 seconds. Stand by for target identification. Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar comfort of a well-trained routine. Her breathing slowed automatically, and Her heart rate decreased as her body prepared for the intense concentration required for precision shooting. This was the moment when everything else faded away except the connection between her, the rifle, and the distant targets. "First target," Williams called out, studying the training area through his spotting scope. "Armed individual on the second floor of Building C, approximately 950 meters. Friendly forces are positioned 30 meters north of the building." Sarah swung her rifle toward Building C and immediately identified the target through her scope. It was a human silhouette positioned in a window, designed to simulate an enemy sniper threatening the friendly forces below. The angle was steep, requiring her to compensate for the elevation change, and the wind was pushing strongly from left to right. "Wind call?" she asked Williams, beginning her breathing routine. "Hold left edge for a 15-mile-per-hour crosswind," he responded. "Time starts now." Sarah made the windage adjustment and settled her crosshairs on the target. She had practiced this exact scenario hundreds of times, but never with the knowledge that her entire future in special operations might depend on the next few moments. The wind flag visible through her scope showed steady conditions, but she could feel occasional gusts that might affect her shot. She controlled her breathing, waiting for the natural pause between heartbeats when her body was perfectly still. The trigger broke cleanly, and she maintained her sight picture to observe the bullet's impact. Through her scope, she saw the target's silhouette snap backward as the bullet found its mark exactly where she had aimed. "Hit, center mass," Williams confirmed. "Excellent shot." But there was no time to celebrate. The radio was already crackling with the next target assignment, and Sarah was cycling the bolt of her rifle to chamber a fresh round. The exercise had been designed to test not just accuracy, but the ability to maintain performance under time pressure while managing multiple targets in rapid succession. Second target, building a rooftop approximately 1,100 meters. Multiple friendlies in vicinity exercise extreme caution. This shot was significantly more challenging. The increased distance meant greater bullet drop and wind drift, while the presence of friendly forces near the target area required absolute precision. Any shot that missed could potentially endanger the instructors playing the role of the stranded SEAL team. Sarah found the target and immediately began calculating the additional holdovers required for the extended range. At 1,100 meters, her bullet would drop significantly from the line of sight, requiring her to aim several feet above the actual target. Meanwhile, the crosswind would push the bullet substantially off course unless she compensated properly. "Wind holding steady at 15 miles per hour, Williams reported. "You've got 70 seconds remaining." The pressure of the time limit was designed to simulate the urgency of real combat situations, where delays in providing fire support could result in casualties among friendly forces. Sarah forced herself to maintain her methodical approach despite the artificial time constraint. Rushing would only increase the likelihood of a miss, which would be far worse than a slight delay. She made her adjustments and settled into her shooting position again. This target was smaller and partially obscured by building features, requiring her to thread the bullet through a narrow window of opportunity. The wind seemed to be increasing slightly, and she could see the flags downrange shifting more dramatically. 50 seconds, Williams announced. Sarah found her natural breathing pause and squeezed the trigger. The shot felt good as it broke, but at extended range, even small variations in conditions could affect the outcome. She maintained her sight picture and watched as her bullet covered the distance to the target. "Hit! Good shot," Williams confirmed, but his voice carried a note of concern. "Wind is picking up significantly. Next target is going to be challenging." The third target was the most difficult yet. A moving silhouette at 1,200 meters, representing an enemy attempting to flank the friendly forces. Moving targets required Sarah to calculate not just wind drift and bullet drop, but also the speed and direction of the target's movement. She would need to aim at a point where the target would be when her bullet arrived, not where it was when she fired. Target moving left to right. Estimated speed, 5 miles per hour, Williams reported. Distance 1,200 meters. Wind now gusting to 25 miles per hour. Sarah tracked the moving target through her scope, studying its pattern of movement to predict where it would be in the time it took her bullet to cover 1,200 meters. At that distance, her bullet would take nearly 2 seconds to reach the target, during which time the silhouette would cover a significant amount of ground. The wind conditions were now at the upper limit of what could be considered manageable for precision shooting. Gusts of 25 miles per hour would push her bullet substantially off course, and the variable nature of the wind made it difficult to predict exactly how much compensation was needed. 60 seconds for this target, Williams announced. This is the final shot of the qualification sequence. Sarah knew that everything came down to this moment. She had successfully engaged 2 stationary targets, but this moving target in challenging wind conditions would determine whether she passed or failed the most important test of her military career. More than that, it would influence how the special operations community viewed the potential for women to serve in the most elite units. She tracked the target's movement for several cycles, establishing its speed and predicting its path. The wind was still gusting unpredictably, but she noticed a pattern in the flag movements that suggested brief periods of relative stability. She would need to time her shot for one of those moments, while also predicting the target's position. 30 seconds, Williams warned. Sarah made her windage and elevation adjustments, leading the target by what she calculated to be the correct amount. The crosshairs settled into a smooth tracking motion, following the target's movement while she prepared to fire during the next lull in the wind. The wind flags stabilized for a moment, and Sarah squeezed the trigger without consciously deciding to shoot. It was the kind of instinctive response that came from thousands of hours of training, where the conscious mind stepped aside and allowed muscle memory to execute the perfect shot. At 1,200 meters, it took what felt like an eternity for the bullet to reach its target. Sarah maintained her sight picture, tracking the moving silhouette until she saw it suddenly stop and fall backward, indicating a successful hit. Target down, Williams confirmed, his voice carrying a note of amazement. That was an outstanding shot under extremely challenging conditions. The radio crackled with confirmation from the exercise controllers, and Sarah finally allowed herself to relax slightly. She had successfully completed all 3 engagements within the time limits, demonstrating the kind of precision shooting that would be required of a SEAL sniper in combat conditions. As they began packing up their equipment, Williams turned to her with an expression of genuine respect. "I've been instructing sniper courses for 8 years," he said, "and that sequence of shots was as good as I've ever seen from a candidate. The moving target shot in those wind conditions was simply exceptional." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, Petty Officer. I've been training for this opportunity for a long time." The truck ride back to base was quiet, but Sarah could sense that something had changed. The successful completion of Exercise Crosswind had proven that she could perform at the level required for SEAL operations, even under the most challenging conditions. But more than that, it had demonstrated her ability to remain calm and execute precisely when everything was on the line. #Rising Respect. Part 3. The mess hall fell silent as Sarah entered for dinner that evening. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words, heavy with unspoken recognition and grudging respect. Word of her performance during Exercise Crosswind had traveled quickly through the tight-knit SEAL community, and she could feel dozens of eyes tracking her movement as she made her way through the serving line. At a corner table sat Master Chief Donovan, a legend among Navy SEALs who had served for over 20 years and earned more combat decorations than most soldiers could imagine. He was surrounded by other senior enlisted personnel, all veterans of multiple deployments who had seen the best and worst of what special operations had to offer. As Sarah approached with her tray, looking for an empty table, Donovan's gravelly voice cut through the silence. "Chun," he called out, gesturing toward an empty chair at their table. "Seat." Every conversation in the mess hall stopped completely. Junior personnel, turned in their chairs to watch what would happen next. Sarah understood instinctively that this moment would define how she was perceived by the SEAL community from this point forward. The invitation to sit with the senior enlisted leaders was not just about sharing a meal. It was about acceptance into a brotherhood that had never before included someone like her. She walked over and took the offered seat, setting her tray down carefully while maintaining eye contact with Donovan. The Master Chief was studying her with the kind of intense scrutiny that made most people uncomfortable, but Sarah had learned to meet such challenges head-on. "Heard you put on quite a show today," Donovan said finally. "Williams tells me you made 3 for 3 in wind conditions that would challenge most of our designated marksmen." "I did what I trained to do, Master Chief," Sarah replied simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." A slight smile creased Donovan's weathered face. "That's exactly the right answer. Too many hot shots come through here thinking they're God's gift to warfare. You seem to understand that good shooting is just table stakes for what we do here." The other men at the table nodded in agreement. Sarah recognized them as the kind of operators who had built the SEAL reputation through decades of successful missions in every corner of the world. Their acceptance would carry more weight than any official evaluation or test score. "The moving target shot at 1,200 meters," said Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, a sniper instructor whose own reputation was legendary within the community. "Williams showed me the video footage. In those wind conditions, that was a shot maybe 5% of qualified snipers could make consistently." Sarah felt a flush of pride, but kept her expression neutral. "I had good training before I came here, and excellent instruction since I arrived. Credit belongs to the people who taught me." "Hell," laughed another chief. "Most of the candidates we see can't even hit stationary targets at that range on a calm day. You're making shots that would qualify you for advanced sniper school right now." The conversation continued around the table, gradually shifting from Sarah's performance to broader discussions about training methods, equipment modifications, and war stories from recent deployments. What struck her most was how naturally she had been included in the discussion. These men were talking to her as they would any other potential teammate, sharing insights and experiences that were typically reserved for proven operators. As dinner progressed, other candidates began filtering into the mess hall. Sarah noticed how they looked toward her table with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Her successful completion of Exercise Crosswind had elevated her status among her peers, but more importantly, it had demonstrated that she belonged at this level of training. Stevens, the former Marine who had been one of her main competitors throughout the program, approached the table with obvious hesitation. The senior chiefs made room for him, and he sat down across from Sarah with an expression that mixed admiration with something approaching awe. "That shot today," he said without preamble, "the moving target in the wind. I've been trying to figure out how you calculated the lead time and wind compensation. The math alone should have taken longer than the time limit allowed." Sarah considered her response carefully. Stevens was a good operator and a decent person, but he represented the kind of analytical approach to shooting that could sometimes work against instinctive marksmanship. "I didn't calculate it," she said finally. "I felt it. Felt it." Stevens looked confused. Master Chief Donovan leaned forward with interest. "Go on, Chun. Explain what you mean." "At extended range, especially with moving targets and variable wind, you can't rely entirely on mathematical calculations," Sarah explained. "The conditions change too quickly, and there are too many variables to process consciously. You have to develop an intuitive understanding of how all the factors interact." She paused, searching for the right words to describe something that had become second nature to her. "My grandfather used to say that good shooters think their way to the target, but great shooters feel their way there. After a certain point, you have to trust your training and let your subconscious mind make the micro adjustments." Chief Martinez nodded knowingly. "That's what separates marksmen from snipers. Anyone can learn to make calculations and follow procedures. But in combat, when you've got 30 seconds to make a shot that might save your teammate's life, you need that intuitive understanding." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Harrison, the DevGru officer who had spoken with Sarah before the exercise. He approached the table with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested official business rather than casual conversation. "Chun," he said, "I need to speak with you privately when you're finished here." The table fell silent again, but this time the atmosphere was charged with anticipation rather than uncertainty. Sarah understood that whatever Harrison wanted to discuss would likely determine the next phase of her career. She finished her meal quickly and followed him out of the mess hall. Harrison led her to a small conference room that she had never seen before, one that was clearly reserved for sensitive discussions. The walls were lined with photographs of SEAL operations from around the world, and Sarah recognized several faces from the legendary missions that had defined modern special operations. First, Harrison began, without preamble, "Congratulations on today's performance. The exercise was designed to test capabilities that we normally don't evaluate until much later in advanced training. You exceeded our expectations significantly." Sarah felt a surge of relief, but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, sir. I'm grateful for the opportunity to demonstrate my capabilities. The question now," Harrison continued, "is what we do with those capabilities. Your performance today has attracted attention from some very senior people in the special operations community, people who are responsible for manning our most critical missions." He paused to study her reaction before continuing. "I'm going to be direct with you, Chun. You're not just the first woman to make it this far in SEAL training. Based on what I observed today, you're one of the most naturally gifted precision marksmen we've seen in years, regardless of gender." Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but maintained her composure. "I appreciate that assessment, sir. I'm committed to completing the program and earning my place as a fully qualified operator." "That's what I wanted to discuss," Harrison said. "There are different paths forward from here, and I want to make sure you understand your options before making any decisions." He activated a wall-mounted display that showed organizational charts for various special operations units. Sarah recognized the structure of SEAL teams, but there were also other organizations that she was less familiar with. "Option 1, Harrison explained, is to complete standard SEAL training and be assigned to one of the regular teams. You'd be a valuable addition to any team, and your marksmanship skills would be greatly appreciated. But you'd also be limited by the operational tempo and mission sets of conventional SEAL operations. Option 2, he continued, highlighting a different section of the organizational chart, is to complete SEAL training and immediately transition to advanced sniper school, followed by assignment to a specialized precision fires team. This would allow you to focus entirely on long-range interdiction and support missions." Sarah studied the charts while processing the implications of each option. Both paths would fulfill her goal of serving at the highest levels of special operations, but they represented very different career trajectories. "There's also option 3, Harrison said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Complete SEAL training, attend advanced sniper school, and be considered for assignment to DevGru. This would put you in the running for the most challenging missions we conduct, but it would also mean a level of scrutiny and pressure that most operators never experience." The room fell silent as Sarah absorbed the significance of what was being offered. Assignment to DevGru was the pinnacle of special operations careers, reserved for operators who had proven themselves capable of handling the most dangerous and sensitive missions in the world. "Sir," she said carefully, "are you saying that my performance today has qualified me for consideration at that level?" "I'm saying that today's exercise was actually a preliminary evaluation for advanced programs," Harrison replied. "The observers you noticed weren't just from SEAL Training Command. They were from every major special operations unit in the Navy, and they were here specifically to assess your potential." He pulled up another display showing performance metrics from the exercise. Sarah's scores were highlighted in green, indicating successful completion of every requirement. But more than that, her times and accuracy measurements were significantly better than the minimum standards. "Your moving target engagement," Harrison explained, "was recorded and analyzed by our ballistics experts. The shot was made under conditions that our computer models indicate have less than a 15% probability of success, even for expert marksmen. The fact that you made it look routine suggests capabilities that we rarely encounter. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and overwhelming responsibility. Everything she had worked toward was suddenly within reach, but she also understood that accepting these opportunities would mean stepping into a world where failure was not just personal disappointment, but could have national security implications. What would be required for option 3? She asked. Complete SEAL training at the top of your class, Harrison replied. Attend and excel at advanced sniper school. Pass psychological evaluations that are significantly more rigorous than anything you've experienced so far. And demonstrate consistently that you can perform under pressure that makes today's exercise look like basic marksmanship training. He paused before adding, and understand that if you choose this path, you'll be pioneering something entirely new. There are no female operators in DevGru currently, which means you'd be breaking ground that comes with unique challenges and opportunities. Sarah thought about her grandfather's words about making the shot that mattered most when everything was on the line. She had spent her entire military career preparing for exactly this kind of opportunity, even when it seemed impossible that it would ever be offered. Sir, she said finally, I'd like to pursue option 3. I want to serve where my skills can make the biggest difference, regardless of the challenges involved. Harrison nodded with what appeared to be approval. I thought you might say that, but I want you to take some time to really consider what you're committing to. Talk to some of the operators here, understand what this career path really entails. The offer will remain open, but make sure you're making the decision for the right reasons. As they concluded their meeting, Sarah felt the weight of possibility settling around her. The conversation with Harrison had revealed opportunities that exceeded her most ambitious dreams, but it had also made clear that the road ahead would be more challenging than anything she had yet experienced. Walking back toward the barracks, she passed the training areas where she had spent countless hours over the past months. Each location held memories of struggles overcome, skills developed, and personal barriers broken. But more than that, they represented the foundation upon which she would build whatever came next. The evening air carried the sound of ocean waves breaking against the shore, a constant reminder of the maritime heritage that defined the Navy SEALs. Sarah paused for a moment to listen to that sound and think about the journey that had brought her to this point. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to prove herself. There would be more tests, more evaluations, and more moments when everything would depend on her ability to perform when it mattered most. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Coronado, Sarah Chun felt like she truly belonged among the warriors who had dedicated their lives to serving at the highest levels of special operations. The mess hall was nearly empty when she returned for a late evening snack, but Master Chief Donovan was still there, nursing a cup of coffee and reading mission reports. He looked up as she entered and gestured for her to join him again. Heard you had an interesting conversation with Commander Harrison, he said with a knowing smile. Word travels fast around here, especially when it concerns someone who just made military history. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. Military history might be overstating it, Master Chief. I just did what I was trained to do. That, Donovan said, pointing at her with his coffee cup, is exactly why you're going to succeed. You understand that exceptional performance should be the standard, not the exception. That attitude will take you as far as you want to go in this business. He paused to sip his coffee before continuing. But I want to give you some advice, operator to operator. The path you're considering is going to put you under a microscope like nothing you've experienced before. Every success will be analyzed for what it says about women in special operations. Every failure will be scrutinized for the same reasons. Sarah nodded, understanding the truth in his words. I've been thinking about that responsibility since I first applied for SEAL training. All I can do is focus on being the best operator I can be and let my performance speak for itself. Good, Donovan said with approval. Remember that when things get tough, and they will get tough, but if today was any indication, You've got what it takes to handle whatever comes next. As Sarah finally made her way back to her quarters that night, she reflected on how much had changed in a single day. The successful completion of Exercise Crosswind had been just the beginning. The conversations with Harrison and Donovan had revealed a future filled with possibilities that exceeded anything she had dared to hope for. But, more than that, the reactions of her peers and instructors had shown her something that she had been seeking since the beginning of her military career: genuine acceptance based on capability and character rather than accommodations or lowered standards. The road ahead would be challenging, but Sarah Chun was ready for whatever tests awaited her. She had proven today that she belonged among the elite warriors of the Navy SEALs. Tomorrow, she would begin the next phase of earning her place in that legendary brotherhood.